evaluate the strength of different reactions, because the strongest reactions in a panel and the weakest might help you to identify the specificities. And the reactivity phase, is it reactive by enzymes? Is it reactive only by indirect antiglobulin test? Is it reactive in saline? What about the thermal amplitude? Is it stronger as you perform the panels at lower temperatures, for example? So all of these things can actually give you clues as to the antibodies you're dealing with. These are just showing panels by antiglobulin technique and enzyme-treated cells. So we have negative by antiglobulin technique, and we can see that there is actually an antibody present, demonstrated by the enzyme-treated cell technique. So, as I mentioned, you have clues. Maybe this antibody is resistant to papain. We have the same strength of reaction here. Maybe there's an antibody present as well that's enhanced by papain. Rh antibodies, for example, are very often enhanced with papain. And then we have antibodies with different strength reactions. We have antibodies that are frankly papain sensitive, so these cells do no longer express that antigen. And so these are the clues, if you like. We have to be Sherlock Holmes very often and identify the clues and hope that those clues lead us to the right answer. So you need to ask what antibodies do react in this way. Use these different methods to your advantage. If the phenotype of the patient is known, that's a big clue, because you know exactly what type of antibody the patient can make. And also what antibodies are common in the population that you're dealing with. Obviously, we wouldn't be expecting to find lots of anti-Ds here or anti-big Ks. So these are all helpful clues. So this is just to show an example of an antibody identification panel profile. And here we have reactions, and we can see that this particular antibody is reacting by antiglobulin. Reactions look exactly like an anti-M. So are we correct in our supposition? Well, as I mentioned, we can do phenotyping, and so we can then know whether this antibody is a possibility. And if we look here for antibody exclusion, this patient is actually M negative, N positive. So we know that this patient can actually make anti-M. This patient happens to be little r, so we know that there's a possibility at least of making big C, big D, or big E. We can see that the patient is big S negative, therefore the patient can make anti-big S. We can see that the patient is negative for FYA, so the patient can make anti-FYA. And similarly, because the patient is negative for JKB, KIT-B, the patient can make anti-JKB. So we know that these are the antibodies that are possible. So we look back at our panel, there's no reactions whatsoever by enzyme-treated cells, and so we can say that there is, it's very unlikely that any of these are likely to be RH. This antibody is likely to be within the RH system or the KIT system. We can see these two negatives are also M negative. But what about FYA and big S? Are they a possibility perhaps? Well, in actual fact, these two cells are actually negative for big S and for FYA. So we need to confirm the specificity. Are we dealing with M plus S plus FYA, or two of those antibodies? So we need to select cells that are positive and negative for those suspected antibodies. And this helps us to either confirm or rule out certain antibodies, and sometimes it can actually reveal an antibody that you didn't suspect you were dealing with at all. mentioned, we do full phenotypes to ascertain the possibility of specificities, but we can only do that, and that's only helpful if the patient hasn't been recently transfused. Otherwise, you might be getting the phenotype of the transfused cells or mixed field reactions, as we saw yesterday. And similarly, if the cells are DAT positive, if it's a hemolytic anemia patient, for example, then monoclonal antibodies can be helpful, but sometimes the only way to determine the phenotype is by molecular methods, and we will be hearing about that from Dr. Daniels a little bit later on. What we need to remember is that lack of an antigen doesn't automatically confirm that specificity. It's only another clue and another piece of information that we have to work with. So in this particular case, we would need to select cells that are M negative, big S positive, but FYA negative, so that we can see whether there is the possibility of an anti-big S there. We would select cells M negative, big S negative, but FYA positive, and similarly cells that are M positive, but big S and FYA negative. We would also include a cell that is negative for all three of those antigens as a control. So this means that these cells, or at least the individuals, are homozygous for the genes, which means that there is double dose or assumed double dose expression of the antigens at the red cell level. And in this particular case, the results were positive with cell 1, positive with cell 2, negative with cell 3, and of course negative with cell 4. So this means that the antibody is actually not anti-M, although it looked like a very simple anti-M specificity originally. And it's more likely to be anti-big S plus FYA. And this actually is reacting typically for these antibodies. They're reacting by an antiglobulin technique, but not with the papain-treated cells. And both of these are clinically important antibodies, and anti-M would be excluded. Generally, to assign specificity, we say you should have at least 2 cells.
Dr. Jung from Ho Chi Minh Blood Center come first. This is special guest today. Yes, and I will start. Yeah. We are very glad to thank Dr. Jung for the last 2 days to support us and the speech. Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Jung. I'd like to invite Dr. Yaya Prasmin, of course. We would like to have a souvenir gift for you. Thank you very much for your speech, your lecture. Next one, of course, we'd like to invite Dr. Daniel Jeff. Yes, thank you very much for the and of course, Mr. Emriera Robilo is our yes. Yeah, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
also have some gift for David for the last from Switzerland. Yes. We would like also to invite Mr. David Passport to have a few words to end the third Asia Pacific diamed5 course.
Thank you very much.
Để xác lên mình.
And I sincerely hope that you profited from this, from Dr. Yasmin, from Dr. Jeff, from Mala, and let's hope to see you all again. Thank you.
So finally, of course, wish you all have an enjoyable stay in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, and also have a safe trip back home, of course. And we'll see you next time. Could be everywhere in Asia Pacific. Thank you very much.